Hello everybody and welcome to Jacqueline Rose Women's Health and the Menopause Sisterhood, and anywhere that you're watching, whether it be on my YouTube channel or anywhere, welcome. This is continuing content shared as part of Menopause Awareness Month, and I'm so happy to have you here. Today we are going to be talking about something that you may not even realize exists because it's quite subtle. Once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. And once you pay attention to it, it's going to annoy you everywhere that you see it. What am I talking about? I am talking about the negative language and stereotypes around the menopause conversation. So let's get down and let's try and peel back the layers of what this is, where it exists, and how we can change that. So let's begin with what your perception is of a menopausal woman. Think in your mind, when you think of menopause, a woman going through menopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, a woman, the image of a woman that you have as a menopausal woman. And probably that image, now not 100% of the time, but definitely when I ask these questions in my workshops, many women use the language of old, irrelevant, shriveled, tired, hot flushes. They associate symptoms with it, aging, but anything that symbolizes this old, deteriorating woman, that is often the image that we have in our heads. Now, sometimes women actually associate, when I ask these questions, some very strong positive language, and I love that because that is the direction that we're going in. But for many, many women, the first images, the first language, the first visions they have in their head of a menopausal woman is negative. An old lady with grey hair, or a lady who sort of moves slowly and has aching joints, or a woman who is already past her prime. And all of that language really comes from the years of stereotypes imaging that we have seen when we talk about menopause or menopausal women. It are these women with grey hair. It is women who are hunched over. It is a woman who is, on her way to decline. That is often the image that has been perpetuated of menopause. The word perimenopause, remember, may be new to some of you and really didn't exist many years ago, that perimenopause stage of life. And so now the modern menopause story is very, very different. And it's different for a number of reasons. But I still want you to pay attention to the images that we see of a midlife woman, of a menopausal woman, of a postmenopause woman. Yes, things are changing, and often you will see in pop culture and in media and on TV, conversations with some very big name superstars who are very proud to talk about their menopause, who are navigating menopause with which looks like, the way that they look, the way they express it is very, very different. However, for many, many of us, those images are still very fixed in our heads of what menopause is. And not only for us, but for society, in our workplace, in the language that we use. We're embarrassed to talk about it. We don't want to talk about the fact that we may be in perimenopause heading up to menopause. We don't want to talk about our symptoms. We don't even want to think about postmenopause. I just had a conversation, heard a conversation on a podcast with someone who is a very strong, outspoken woman who talks a lot about feminism and a lot about strong, empowered women. And she got asked a question about menopause, and she was like, I don't want to talk about menopause. I'm not there yet. I don't want to discuss it. I don't want to really go near there. And so even within our educated, empowered, feminist culture that we are living in, there is still a lot of negativity, barriers and blockages when we talk about perimenopause and menopause, when we talk about this stage of life. And we really want to totally erase that conversation, that narrative. We want to change the narrative for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our family, for our colleagues, for the spaces that we spend a lot of time in, because the modern menopause journey is not like that. The modern menopause journey of women today in their 40s and 50s, and the next generation of women who are coming into their 40s and 50s, menopause is a very, very different experience for a number of reasons. The work is being done slowly to change this. We are seeing it in TV shows. We are seeing it show up more in movies. Great movie just recently put out with Emma Thompson. There are a lot about an older woman finding her sexuality. There are a lot more visualizations now, images, and public personas who are now coming out talking more about what it means to be a midlife woman. A lot more, film stars, and whilst the film stars should not be our only representation, when they are talking about it, it helps to break down the myths and the stereotypes, and it helps to bring the conversation to a more general public. But there is a lot going on now in many places, specifically in England, where members of parliament are talking about it, where colleagues and workplaces are talking about it, where morning shows are talking about it. There is a lot more conversation on Facebook about menopause. It hasn't reached anywhere near what we want it to reach, but there is the beginning of a movement of being realistic and honest, having honest and open conversations about what menopause is. And I want to go back to that perimenopause conversation, because I think that is where the biggest myths still exist, where the biggest stereotypes still exist, and where the biggest lack of information and knowledge exists. Perimenopause is that time before menopause, that golden date in the calendar of menopause, the date of your last period. But perimenopause are all the years leading up to that, anywhere from 2 to 10 years. That means women in their early to mid 40s are already experiencing many symptoms. You do not need to wait till you're 48, 49, 50 to start engaging with menopause, because menopause is happening, perimenopause is happening in those early 40s and mid 40 years. And so many women don't know and don't realize. So you can be a strong, vibrant, working woman. You may still even have young kids. You may be experiencing the fullness of life, but noticing changes. Things are not as easy as they used to be. You may be more tired. You may be experiencing brain fog, forgetfulness, achy joints, weight gain, low motivation, low libido, low sexual desire, vaginal dryness, urinary tract infections. A lot of different things may be happening, and you may either not be aware that this is perimenopause, or maybe trying to navigate it as best you can, or ignoring it while you're trying to really manage all the other things that life is throwing at you as it does in your 40s. But this is perimenopause, and you don't need to be an old woman, a grey-haired woman, a joint pain, achy woman. You don't need to be past the prime of your life. You don't need to be heading into deterioration. That is not what perimenopause and menopause looks like anymore. Even postmenopause, a woman in postmenopause in her 60s, 70s, and 80s does not look like the way that you may imagine an old grandma with a grey hair and a bun on top of her head, hobbling around with a walking stick. That is not what a 70-year-old woman looks like today necessarily. An 80-year-old woman does not look like that today. Think of vibrant women in their 70s and 80s who are still doing so much. That is the representation, that is the example, the role models that we want to be looking at. Those women experienced menopause 20, 30 years ago, when menopause still was that, stereotypical version of what menopause was, but they have managed to navigate and really step into the fullness of what postmenopause should be today. So I want us to really think about the images that we're seeing of women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and pay attention to the images that you are seeing, whether it be in news, in media, on TV, in adverts, in magazines. How are they representing a midlife woman? And how do you engage with that? And how are you connecting to that? Does it scare you? Does it empower you? Does it make you excited for what's ahead? Do you think that you don't want to even think about it until you are forced to? How do you engage and connect with these images that you're seeing? And do they represent who you are today as a woman in perimenopause or menopause, or maybe in postmenopause? And to really start thinking about, what is the language that we use? Is it negative language of pain, suffering, struggle, frustration, being annoyed, being debilitated? Or are we able to put different language onto this? That this is a time of rebirth, of growing, of exploring and discovering new elements of yourself and new parts of yourself? Is it about connection? Is it about listening to your body? Is it about maybe really trying to figure out who it is that you want to be? And that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be challenging, easy, or it doesn't need to be easy, but it can be empowering. Empowering doesn't need to be easy. It can also be a challenging time. We know that you only really grow when you overcome something. The question is, what is the language? How do you relate to your symptoms? Do you call them debilitating symptoms that you really, like floor you, which absolutely may be the case. But can we maybe reframe this in a different way and figure out how to navigate this time in a more empowered way, in a more confident way, and understand that when we get into post-menopause, that is really when everything has changed, and really where you can step into all the potential that is waiting for you. And also remember that suffering, struggle, and frustration is not a prerequisite for menopause. It is not a prerequisite for aging, because not every woman has a struggle experience. There are women who do navigate these years of perimenopause and menopause with much more ease, really embracing this time, not necessarily with so many symptoms. And if perimenopause and menopause was only about symptoms, was only about struggle, suffering, and confusion, you wouldn't have the women who told their stories that were not like that, that were a bit different, that actually they were able to navigate it without those symptoms. And those need to become more of the stories that we hear, to know that it is not all bad during this time, and to really start to understand the language that we use, the language that we hear, the language that we see, and how do we want to try and maybe navigate things a bit differently. And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna-ish about this. I'm not trying to be all sunshine and roses about this. There is absolutely a way to navigate this time without that negative language. And it's really about trying to figure out, what is this journey for you, and how can we embrace it in a slightly different way. I know that for many women, they really have symptoms that are real and impact them and prevent them from living the life they want to live. But once we understand what is going on in this time, once we find the people to support us and get the strategies we need to help manage our symptoms, we can navigate these years in a different way. And we can try and figure out, even if we are having a hard time, to put it in the framework and the context of, what does it mean to be a perimenopause and menopausal woman? So I hope that's given you something to think about. I hope that's given you a little bit of maybe a slightly different perspective, really trying to understand this stage from a different point of view, and understand that a lot of how we feel about this stage of life is perpetuated and reinforced by what we see in our society. So wishing you a continued happy Menopause Awareness Month. Please come back and join me. I am here every day sharing different thoughts, information, strategies, tips with you, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.